I just have a few housekeeping things. One is to tell you we will be recording. And for CME purposes, for those that would like CME, we would just ask that you put your name into the chat box so we can keep attendance. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the talk, so please chat questions into that. I'm going to be monitoring that to help with the Q&A session. And then at the end of the session, we will be sending an email for an evaluation survey, and we'll need that for you to help claim the CME. So I am thrilled to hand it over to the amazing Sue Butts-Dion, who has been a steady, constant, wonderful resource for our main AAP chapter, helping us with a multitude of quality improvement projects. And I will hand it off to her to sort of be our guide for the evening and let her know about this wonderful improvement project that the chapter has been working on, that this talk will dovetail into. So I will hand it over to Sue and say thank you, Sue, and thank you, Dr. Willis, and we'll get going because we got a lot to talk about tonight.
Great. Thank you, Deb, so much. Pleasure to be here. And yeah, I just wanted to tee things up with a little bit about, as Deb was mentioning, a little bit about this learning collaborative that some of you who are on the phone call have been part of, so that's exciting. It was a national collaborative. The acronym is ASHU, which was Advancing Social Health and Early Childhood Wellness, a national collaborative led by the AAP. And Maine was one of 7 states who actually participated in this, and practices from within Maine, there were 8 practices actually who worked on this from July 2020 until June of this year. And there are 4 who are actually continuing with us into phase 2, which is running through December of this year. And the aim is to build state and individual practice systems to implement measurable improvements for addressing perinatal depression, social emotional development, social determinants of health, including adverse childhood experiences and toxic stress. So that's the aim of the project. The next slide, please. It is, some people thought, oh, is it a screening project? And actually, practices did integrate, and we worked with them to integrate screening and to identify risks and strengths. And so we did work on screening, but it was more than that. We actually focused on transforming practice for early relational health. And so we're so excited, actually, that Dr. Willis is with us to talk more with us about this, his specialty and his passion. So glad to have him with us. So it was more than screening, and I think the next slide is a great illustration of kind of the root causes that we dove into. It's a good illustration of the project, how it focused on family-centered care to address both childhood experiences and environments, and that was the core of the project. So again, it was a focus on early relational health, and again, recognizing the essential early relational experiences that contribute so greatly to infant and toddler development. So on the next slide, without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Willis, although he already has fans, as we heard, so that's so awesome. And I know that I'm a fan. Bumped into Dr. Willis when I was on another project, Pediatrics Supporting Parents, similar in some ways to this project. And I always knew, Dr. Willis, that I was going to bump into you again. So I was delighted when I saw that you were on the ASHU project, and I'm so glad that you're able to be with us this evening. As you can see, there's a very rich biography here shared with you on the screen. Dr. Willis is a senior fellow at the Center for Study of Social Policy, and again, a passion for early relational health, and has a very, I think your love, it looks to me like is your family, which is very exciting. So Dr. Willis is board certified in pediatrics and developmental behavioral pediatrics, has his MD from Thomas Jefferson University, proud member of the Oregon Pediatric Society and of the Oregon AAP. And so welcome to Maine this evening. We are so looking forward to your talk this evening and learning from you and with you. So I will turn it over to you, and I think we're going to have you share your slides and your screen.
Yes, we are. That's great.
I'm going to do that.
And there we go. I think, are we all together here? You see my slide set?
We can.
We can.
All right, we're great. So hello, Maine. Good evening. Nice evening there. Back here, I'm in the West Coast and the sun's still up. I'm delighted to be able to share with you this movement, I would suggest, about really promoting strong early relational health. This is sort of the bread and butter of pediatrics, but we're trying to take it ever further into from the knowledge that we have and building on, as I'll touch on, the policy statement that Andy Garner and the AAP just put out about advancing relational health that we can touch on also. So I'm thrilled to share with you this evening some of my thoughts, some of the journey that I've been on, and what we're learning about all of this transformational moment, yet in the context of the hard times that we're all in because of COVID. So what are our learning objectives this evening? One is to describe early relational health and its importance. I want you to sit back and reflect on your own mindset, how you think about foundational relationships and how they're essential for the promotion and the prevention of well-being in thinking about the population efforts too. How you not only seeing individuals, but also thinking about at your chapter level or in your community level, population-based approaches also, and how you're linking and know your communities. And then I want to expand the knowledge base that's growing from evidence-based practices that actually already exist that we can ever more bring more visible into our medical homes and into our communities. And so that's the space we want to talk about. It starts with a belief that I'm sure many of you carry, and I know Mark Rains and I have talked about, and that is even pre-COVID, our children are not doing well. In every population assessment that looks at children's well-being, not just health, but more importantly, their development, the developmental capacities, the loss of developmental capacity as might be represented by those children that are already a bit behind coming into kindergarten readiness, which I would suggest to you is a failure of their developmental process, not only in their learning ability, but within that group are many whose executive systems or their emotional regulation systems are already struggling. And those are pointing to what I believe is, a growing public health agenda about human capital development that is important in terms of the future well-being of this nation. Where's our workforce? And how do we be intentional about using all the science that we know in terms of building well-being? And now, even more challenging in face of COVID, not only the epidemic itself and what it's done to the family's experience, but also the economic challenges that is generated for so many families, and then the racial reckoning that is really elevating an opportunity. But I'm not a Pollyanna. I know the challenges that we're witnessing in practice. I know the challenges that families are having with, at times, meeting even their basic needs, the childcare crisis, the workforce crisis, and the way that stress is impacting young families. And many of us are fearful about the impact of this moment in terms of the future well-being of children all across our systems. And yet I'm an eternal optimist. And I also am in many sectors and dialogues and places and spaces where we're really talking about building back better. Not just the political agenda that the Biden-Harris administration is bringing forth, but also the opportunity that comes forth in terms of redesign, expanding design, and as one may say, in the middle of a crisis is an opportunity. And that's the space that I really want to lean forward on. So we all know a baby's future starts now, and it starts relationally. And every bit of human developmental capacity, health, education, social emotional development, future well-being develops out of the relational experience. And let's be intentional that that is really critically important. And that's become my life work and the many of others about how do we strengthen that positive, nurturing, stimulating environment intentionally? What can we bring to bear in partnering with families in ways to know of their strengths? Or like the ASHU project is trying to bring forth, what are their vulnerabilities in such a way that we view the strengths of all families, but link them to the supports around them or by their neighbors or in their communities that could help build a family's sense of well-being that manifests then in the developmental process of their children. There's a whole science of child development that's been built over the last decades. And the Center for the Developing Child has made it very explicit that early relationships matter, genes and environments interact, that developmental capacities are deeply intertwined with one another, that we know of the deep adversity of toxic stress and adverse childhood experiences and the epigenetic negative impacts that that has on development. But there's a constant force of the healing opportunity of relational health, of relationship experiences. Relationships can buffer the challenges of toxic stress and adversity. It's the isolation or the failure of buffering relationships in human development that really do the dirty work. And the policy statement that Andy just put out, Andy Garner, I think you get a chance to hear from in a few months. I quote him saying that early relational health and the mitigation of toxic stress are two sides of the same coin. The relational patterns matter in this work, in everything that we do in terms of building future well-being and countering toxic stress and adversity. And I would propose right now that in this moment post-COVID, or in the middle of COVID, or as we're trying to emerge post-COVID, intentionally focusing on the strong emotional connection of all of us matters deeply. Early relational health then is the capacity for and the ongoing engagement and growth fostering, empathic and empowering interpersonal interactions. Foundational relationships shape the well-being of the child and the caregiver. It really is dyadic. It's two-way. Families benefit themselves from the positive relationships that they have with their cute little babies and toddlers, as does the toddler and the young children. In fact, there's some good science that shows that strong relational experiences are also promoting the well-being of mothers and fathers, even in first of their adversity. I like to say that generationally speaking, there's always healing forces in the relational context that counters the trauma that has always been in human history. It is the nature of connectedness and social relationships that are protectors. Yet, so much in our culture presently is about isolation, or is about separation, or is about individuals losing the power of the relational context of being connected, of narrative, of shared experience, and of co-regulation that builds my capacity. Early relational health is not a new concept, but it is a new term, and it builds upon decades of research. There's been a large body of longitudinal research that provides strong evidence about how early relationships are important for future well-being. It's come out of the field of infant mental health, child development, and mirror development. But we're activating and elevating the criticalness of relationship efforts to ever more focus on key drivers. And within this frame is a two-generational frame. So the well-being of a family directly predicts the well-being of children. So that all of our work has to be thinking about the well-being of the family, the social determinants around a young child's development. The well-being of a family is as important to our efforts as is the individual child's outcome. Though that work goes hand in hand, and it puts some challenges on the way we built pediatrics as a specialty and how we're now trying to find our best way of partnering in trusted ways with family strengths and the opportunities, and having an agreement relationally that families and we as a health system are committed to the same purpose. How we talk about relationships matters. How we change our dialogue with families about partnering to their resiliencies and strengths, hearing their narratives of their own stories, and how a future can be constructed anew, and how their history of perhaps adversity themselves by being told and by being shared is the first step towards a healing and recovery agenda. Relationships matter, and resiliency gets built out of those opportunities. So shifting our focus in primary care to these relational contexts becomes really important. Sometimes people say, now what are you talking about? Well, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and I would suggest to you a video watching the interactive space tells it all. So let's watch and see this cute little diagram. This little pair are deeply connected. They're sharing the moment. There's clear affect, visual attention, facial attention, engagement. There is no question in your mind or mine that they're sharing this moment. And it's in that space that this little baby looking at us as he or she is being developed by that relational experience. Positive affects are given to the next generation. The baby's brain begs for interactive experiences that builds its and hers capacities. In a similar way, if we go up the developmental ladder, many of you may have seen this amazing this video that went viral, millions of people looking at this dyadic pattern with delight. But I want all of you as clinicians in the room, ask yourselves, now what is it that's so strong in this relationship that has all of us delight in the relational space in a sense of its nonverbal nature? Let's watch.
Okay. They need to work on that, right? Yes, okay. Did you understand it though? No. Okay.
There's as Jack Chunk will say, a serve and return. There's a clear shared affect. There's turn taking.
Yeah, that's the last.
They're clearly sharing the same mind idea.
That's what I was wondering. I don't
It's
know
reciprocal. The child can initiate, the parent can initiate. They're curious with each other, they're sharing the moment.
Oh, yeah.
So in a sense of the relationship itself.
Right, don't bring that in. You know what I'm saying? Don't do the same stuff. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
As you watch them as a dyad, you know a lot's happening between them that they're enjoying that matters.
Go somewhere else with that, but don't bring it here. You know what I'm saying?
That's the relational space. So we're shifting, not just looking at a child individually, but looking at the pattern of the relational development itself, which has been well described. And if one turns one's eyes to the relational space, over time, you can watch the sequence of those developmental skills as a baby's brain development is proceeding in the relational context. The family itself is responding and developing with those interactive developmental spaces. And you know, those that have had first children, that's a journey. Once you get to second, third, fourth, or fifth kids, you have a lot of learning of what those processes are. And yet, you recognize the individual characteristics. But in the developmental sense, there is a sequence of development that's observable, which is what I've been always thrilled about pediatrics. We get a chance, like no others, to participate in the growth relationally from that mutual attention and engagement to that responsiveness of beginning, servant to return. We can watch the joy or its absence in that mutual relationship pattern. All of us in pediatrics know that by 6 months, you can see the joy in the face of a 5 and 6 month old, which is very reassuring to us. And then at about 7 or 8 months, that responsiveness and that positive affect becomes a shared initiation between, where a baby initiates with a parent and a parent with a child, and they're developing their communication dance on top of emotion and responsiveness. And before long, there's an imitative process that is a marker, of course, of child development, and that imitative circle of communication developmental process between them that becomes that servant to return process starts developing into a shared mutual process of purposeful goal that becomes then play. And on top of that develops then language. Those fundamental structures of human development are really essential. And what's amazing is that in that attachment pattern, in that learning developmental pattern, the biology of the synchrony is striking. In fact, at every level of the physiology, there's a biobehavioral and neurodyadic pattern that takes place that's observable at multiple levels, from what we observe behaviorally, as we did with the video, to what we can see at that level of synchrony, that if you slow down the video, you see the dance that's happening non-verbally. And then if you're measuring heart rate variabilities together, you see that in strong emotional connection, dyadically, one can see the alignment of heart rate synchrony, which is developing the regulatory system in that cute little baby's autonomic nervous system. Similarly, there's the entrainment of the endocrine system around cortisol, around dopamine, around oxytocin, those systems of endocrine development, and the regulatory systems of the endocrine stress system likewise are engaged and attuned, as is the observation of even brain synchronies, many saying that that is how the transfer of regulatory systems and health and development take place in those dyadic patterns. And that, dear friends, is where the physiology of all this gets to be really interesting about well-being. And recently, a report I saw that talks about that synchronous caregiving from birth builds over time and tunes the development of the social brain into its functional capacities. That dyadic process, I would propose to you, is in the center now of the way we're thinking about building well-being and countering stress. So this early relational health frame, although a new term, is not a new field. I mean, the field of infant mental health and specialized interventions have been there, but we're purposely activating the promotion, prevention, early identification, and message of everything that we know about building strong relationships. The other thing about an early relational health frame is trying to activate our workforce that touches all families, whereas the infant early childhood mental health workforce is small and mighty, but we're never going to be able to treat ourselves out of the social, emotional, regulatory issues at a population level because we don't have enough mental health providers. And the more we can do in terms of promotion, prevention, upstream is really exciting for us. So let me share with you, there already is work going on. You have a strong Reach Out and Read chapter, forgive my voice, but you have a Reach Out and Read chapter that is committed to promoting literacy. And some of the more recent work with the next chapter of Reach Out and Read is really looking at the foundational relational patterns that start in those first encounters with babies and families about the importance of critical relationships. There are other programs that are out there about promoting first relationships in pediatrics. Mount Sinai now has a parenting center that has a number of videos that are now online that you can use to promote well-being, and they're about to release a whole video series for families along the periodicity of our Bright Futures that again are relationally promoting resources that can be helpful. You may be aware of the Healthy Steps model or Project Dulce, which are team-based medical home models that have a person in the medical home's job to worry about promoting relational health and connecting families to resources they need. And then there's a movement towards measurement that I'll touch in a moment. And you may be aware of Alan Mendelssohn's Video Interaction Project or Phil Fisher's Filming and Nurturing Development using video with families, some within the medical home, to promote relational health, that sense of integrating promotion and mental health and relational health supports into our mental health practices, medical practices. Out in the community in parallel ways, the Triple P Positive Parenting Program, Circle of Security Parenting, a program called Power of Two, which is using the attachment biobehavioral home visiting model in terms of activating families, in terms of who become ambassadors for healing trauma and recovery in the community. Of course, home visiting has been there, but remember, home visiting, and you've got a strong home visiting network, but it only touches 2 to 3%, maybe 4% of the population of need. It's a small lever, but an important lever. And then the whole sense of how do we start building out early childhood community systems with us in our medical home is in a parallel process, the work that's moving forward. So Reach Out and Read I mentioned to you, and we are beginning to work with the National Center of Reach Out and Read about teaching with some training modules through Reach Out and Read that we are now testing in New Jersey that demonstrate how all of us as pediatricians can recognize the signs of early relational health, what are actually called autonomic emotional connection, the characteristics that represent being a trait of being in the emotional connection state that one's observable, just like we did with that first cute dyad. We saw their positive attraction. We saw their vocal communication. We saw their mutual expressiveness. We saw their reciprocity. Those were very reassuring to that sense of being deeply emotionally connected. And the training structure that's being built through Reach Out and Read can also show you quickly in a short time where those patterns are missing. And in a short way, you as providers can recognize emotional connection or when you need to think more about how to help strengthen those characteristics because it's so important for future development. We're also exploring additional approaches of relational health promotion and screening. One of my colleagues, Kate Rosenblum in Michigan, has actually been partnering with some FQHCs and some primary care practices where there's a co-located mental health provider. And they are offering to families who come in for routine well child visits to come in a half hour early to make a little movie to provide feedback to them about the strength of their relationship. In that offering to all families before their well child visit up to a year, 78% of families choose to come in on their own. They're very interested in learning relationally. And that feedback process is all strength-based. But in those situations where some families are struggling, they can feel it, they can see it. It provides an opportunity for a dialogue of then either additional services or referral. So that's another strategy that's moving forward. A team in DC is exploring simply having relational health conversations with families, talking with them intentionally about what's their own history and stories of their own relationships and how do they think that has importance now with the birth of their new baby. And what happens is that families feel heard, they feel connected, and there's a sense of respect to their resiliency, opportunity, and it opens dialogue far beyond screening for ACEs and more about focusing on the resiliency and the positive elements and the awareness of previous history of adversity and challenges come forth such that promoting positive relationships can be emergent. You may be aware of the work at Tufts with Bob Sagi and the HOPE Network, that of course standing for the healthy outcomes from positive experiences, that whole movement that's moving from adversity to resiliency to flourishing, and that sense that foundational relationships matter, and focusing on the positive experiences that families also have, that mitigating toxic stress and vulnerabilities has positive impacts. And we know Christy Bethel's work that was reported recently in JAMA that really looked at the positive childhood experiences that occur in face of ACEs decrease the impact of the ACEs themselves. There's a protective force that exists in parallel with adversity that has to do with the positive supportive relationships in development. Thereby, as we think about children and families we know that are struggling with adversity or risks or difficulties, how do we have intentional conversations of building positive experiences, other social networks and protectors, such that families can be surrounded with the opportunity of their young children experience positive experiences to countermand the risk of the isolation and the lack of mitigation from adversity itself. So, yet we know the medical home itself can't do this work in isolation, let's be clear. And much of the work around promoting well-being includes thinking about the community in the context whereby people live. And likewise, focusing in agenda building of chapters, agenda building of maternal child health, agenda building of the early childhood systems work about the life and the experience that families have. And much of that, the whole early childhood systems work that surrounds our communities and families takes on that strengthening families, protective factors framework. And we're actively, which has been around for almost 20 years, focused on the resiliency factors that we know matter towards future well-being, not only the parents' resiliency themselves, but their social connections and their own awareness of child development. And of course, like the ASHE project, making certain that the social determinants and the concrete needs at this moment are attended to: housing, food, poverty, and trauma. Those issues being attended to matter. And as we speak, 20 years ago, there was a lot of focus knowing the social emotional competence of children mattered. But we're now in the beginning of a journey of updating the Strengthening Families framework, suggesting that a relational frame includes all of the Strengthening Families protective framework. And in fact, early relational health promotes the outcome of which is social emotional competence. So we're looking to activate the Strengthening Families framework ever more with a relational health frame. We also know that at a systems level, as Jack Shunkoff, the Harvard Center really made visible, we really need to be focused on the three principles of change. One is, like we said, supportive, positive, nurturing relationships. Those relational health elements are clearly critical. We're talking about that today. But we also have to be thinking about reducing the sources of stress, not the least of which are the social determinants, not the least of which are the COVID moment, aren't they? And then we also have to be thinking about how do we help families strengthen their own core strengths. That whole positive parenting education effort, the Reach and Read educational effort, the reading to families matters, the sense of having time to connect emotionally for conversation, having those in the moment communication moments around the time of mealtime, at the time of changing the diaper, at the time of when one comes home, having picked up your child from childcare, those moments of being together with families and our messaging strategies that help families see those elements. We're also learning that the strengthening the community networks around families has been a dearth in this nation. And fortunately now with the Build Back Better agenda and with the ARPA dollars that I'll touch on in a moment, there's a major investment. I think it's $8 billion, that's with the B, going out to states, into then local counties for the opportunity of training and building and paying for community health workers, service sector workers, family coaches, promotores. We're doing all we can do to include that some of those dollars, expanding that network of community health workers has an intentional focus upstream prenatal to 3. So the doula network, the family coaches, the developmental specialists, and our friend at the Inc. Mark, Charlie Bruner, has been talking about that all being a relational health workforce. And the more those can be in local communities, those individuals in communities, no matter whether they're rural communities or whether they're communities of specific ethnicities, there are individuals in those communities that are connectors, that know of resources, that perhaps we should be paying them to be the voices of connecting to every new baby born in their neighborhood, like is being done in Mississippi, in the Delta. The health system, the Delta health system actually is paying the natural connectors in their neighborhoods to reach out to pregnant mothers, to help connect them to prenatal care, and then help them follow through in well child visits. Those community health workers have become the connector. And the first thing that's happened has been the decrease in um, maternal mortality and infant mortality, decrease in premature birth, but more importantly, stronger engagement in health system efforts by the navigator being a trusted source of connection. That sense of the connection as a social determinant of health is really strongly elevating, all in keeping with relational frame and this relational work. So we like to say that this is a moment where building parent leaders and networks in the purpose of connecting our work of the medical home and this relational health, public health workforce is a huge opportunity. But it's community by community. It may be county by county. It may be neighborhood by neighborhood. It may be small town by small town. How do we as docs, as nurses, as leaders activate that that's the recovery opportunity for us, for the next generation in face of the post-COVID initiative? That's a relational health frame. And this busy side, though, does show that in the communities itself, there's support for this kind of thinking. Not only Help Me Grow, Part C, or the home visiting networks, or the parent support networks, or the work of new models, but all of that work is surrounding this relational health frame that we're trying to move forward. And we have some exemplar communities that are putting it all together into what we are calling an all-out strategy that goes from natural connectors to navigators and community health workers to activating community churches, community leaders into intentionally focus on the next generation of babies. Every year there's a new cohort of babies, and they either keep their developmental capacity on point or they lose it. And we all know in pediatrics what the drivers are of how a child, unfortunately, because they don't have enough of that joyful, nurturing interaction because of either the stress in the family or because of the isolation or because of simply not knowing that the stars don't twinkle at 6 months, or the dyadic pattern is isolated where that little baby spends all the time playing by themselves, and thereby their ability to regulate state, emotion, attention, cooperation, empathy, participating in learning, work ethic development, and the like is so quickly impacted. Hence, being very intentional to align and surround next generation with all we know relationally, both informal, formal systems of family support, but then the work of interventions and treatments when necessary. So it's really both an exciting time and I would argue a challenging time. We're learning a lot too about the importance of partnering with families. And I'm pointing you to a webinar that we produced, I think it's almost a year ago now, where we presented our findings from focus groups with parents about, shall we say, family voices in early relational health. And what we learned from the focus groups with Hispanic families and with rural families and with Hispanic families, those separate groups that were actually conducted in a cafe-like style by leaders of their own communities. We learned a couple of things. One, that in all three of those family groups, they said that I first have to have a trusting relationship with my physician, but often I feel as though I'm being judged, or I'm not being heard, or they don't have much faith in me, in my capacity. And that was sort of a non-starter for a lot of families. But their second message was, and we wish it was so. We wish it was that our medical home would see us with clear eyes and clear values. Yes, we've had challenges, but help us. And that was sort of the second message. The third message is, how can we train the next generation to listen to us? How can we help elevate the next generation training of physicians to hear our voices to help us? I heard that in very positive tones and in very strong messages. I want to share with you one of our voices that was a discussant of our Family Voices in Early Relational Health brought this summary of what she heard. Your first
Yeah,
impression.
yeah. It's so interesting that part of when you were just speaking, what I was hearing was coming to it around quality, but separating that quality from the quality of quality improvement. And so when I think about that, the two things that were going through my head were meaningfulness and mindfulness. So meaningful engagement with the family, with the parent, and with the child when they are in that appointment. And that engagement doesn't have to be for 15 minutes. Meaningful engagement can happen in small, minute pieces, and it can send a specific message to the parent and to the child about your level of caring. I think that's that empathy coming through, and that compassion coming through when you're doing your care, but also the mindfulness piece. I do think that when we think about things like implicit bias, and David, I hear you every time you speak talk about how pediatricians want to show up and how they want to do their work. And for me, understanding the medical system and how the healthcare system works, that does mean taking on the personal accountability for being anti-racist and working on yourself individually as a service provider so that when you're in those moments, you are mindful and you are coming from a very different place. And especially because of the lack of time and how rushed doctors are and all of those things. I think the meaningfulness and the mindfulness together with that quality can make all the difference in that appointment that is always too short and never long enough.
It's gonna come. Well, I want to thank Brenda Blasingame, who ran who ran Health Connect One, but ran early childhood systems work in Custer County in California. And I have to say myself, I've been on my own journey of reflection, exploring my racial biases, exploring my own privilege, thinking through how do I listen and how do I really listen? How do I partner and see the strengths authentically of all families, no matter where they start? And I'm sure each one of you are on a similar journey of reflection, learning. And I've been so struck as to when I'm an ally with families, they teach me and help me learn so much about how to be more responsive to their moment and to what their opportunities in front of us. That's a grand challenge for all of us. Let me finish up over the next 5 minutes, and these slides will be available to you, but just touching on policy, because in my whole career, I've never seen a more positive moment for child health policy opportunities than what we're encountering now, not the least of which is this policy statement that came out of the AAP. And I just want to note that Andy Garner calls out that focusing on safe, stable, and nurturing relationships that buffer adversity and build resilience means that pediatric care is on the cusp of a paradigm shift, reprioritizing clinical activities, rewriting research agendas, and aligning our collective wisdom. That's a tall order and a call pull. There's a lot of discussion about rethinking primary care pediatrics far more into team-based care models, where community health workers are connected with the medical home, where home visitors may even be deployed, or at least have a bidirectional communication with the medical home to do our work and eyes and ears with families. And there's a whole movement you may be aware of universal home visiting, like the Family Connects model. Connecticut, Oregon, Illinois, have developed these, and there's some other states, state level initiatives for universal home visiting touch points to, shall we say, develop a targeted universalism of those families that can be connected to greater service needs, and that communication back to the medical home. That sense of a team that's with the community and our medical home. The navigators I've mentioned, the doula movement, which begins connecting with families prenatally, but there's a movement towards doula home visiting and the connection over time of partnering with families in local networks of support. And of course, the behavioral health integration that we have in our medical homes. You may be aware of our the Healthy Steps model, which is 0 to 3 is championing, which provides a developmental specialist in the medical home. And back to my comments about this moment in time, we're working hard, as are the policy spaces that are coming forth within the Biden-Harris ARPA, that with dollars that are actually available that can help part of the rebuilding, not the least of which is the child care credit, the child credit with families. So at this moment, let me just imagine with you some of the early relational health policy goals. One is, of course, to be thinking that early relational health is actually a promotion to advance equity. It also includes supporting the socioeconomic security for that 2-generation success. And you may have seen some recent data that shows more than half of families with young children have been, that were previously in poverty, are now moving above the poverty line. And the sense of greater well-being is felt by that economic impact. The movement towards high-performing medical homes is important. The sense that we have models of evidence-based practices that can be strengthened, expanding screening, early identification of family needs, really important. The importance to identify early intervention and respond to those early risks in terms of targeted universalism and monitoring. The integration of mental health services, and astoundingly, within the current ARPA dollars is the 1-year continuation on Medicaid of children and mothers that allows for the opportunity to expand dyadic mental health treatment services when needed. The co-location of integrated mental health services, the training of the workforce, not only early relational health work for Reach on Read in pediatrics, but also for the community, and supportive care coordination, the community partnering with families in the community, that whole building a community health workforce. All of these efforts are opportunities that are right in front of us that require leadership and vision as to where are you in individual communities, where are you collectively as a state. As we speak with the American Rescue Act plan, there are opportunities, not only the economic relief that includes that credit for reducing child poverty, but there's health coverage expansions, access to greater basic supports, and greater investments in Part C. The devil's in the details of activating those dollars that come to your states and communities, but my point is they are available to use and strengthen, again, under leadership and guidance and vision that you individually or collectively can attend to. Within the ARPA investments, there's already within the legislation the opportunity to expand training in early relational health for community health workers. You may be aware there's been expansion of pediatric mental health care access grants. I think Maine has one, I hope. And then that financing to support dyadic interventions with postpartum Medicaid coverage for mothers is really important. And in the current reconciliation bill, the paid family and medical leave, the promotion of that Healthy Steps model through FQHCs, and a focus on on addressing trauma, recovery, and resiliency upstream with the RISE Act, and efforts to intensify the supports around maternal well-being. Those are all in the next alliteration. And states can do a lot as we speak on this workforce, on training, around family support, being intentional about building out strategies for advancing the primary care medical home, infant mental health work, early childhood systems work. And I've never seen an opportunity more, but it takes vision, leaderships, and teams of people like your chapter, like your ASHE project, like partnering with your home visiting networks or Title V or Medicaid or others. I want to close by just reminding all of us, there's power in human connection. That's what we're trying to harness. One human relationship can help weather adversity. That emotional connection of knowing feeling, and sharing connection matters. It starts early and becomes a trait that we can use, and it becomes a state that becomes a habit pattern of interaction that becomes our way of being. The power of human relationships, though, comes from simple and ordinary daily interactions. And none of us need to be perfect in that effort. All of you know those tiny moments that can be built. And finishing up, I want you to think more broadly about what do we actually know that we can together.
I actually believe that children develop parents as much as parents develop children. And any of us that have had kids know that that journey is a pact. I mean, we're on a journey with them and they pull from us what they need. And we have to be responsive and reactive, and we contribute a bit. That's, and so I absolutely believe in that mindset that it's a journey together with their child. The second thing I would add is, I also think that the wisdom that goes generationally also is a part of that journey, the wisdom of many. And no parent is perfect, nor do they need to be. And no one parent is responsible for the healthy future development of their child, because it's far more complex than that. But the journey of the multiple relationships are a part of assuring well-being. So that's why culture, that's why I think networks of people surrounding young families is a part of the resiliency strategy that captures healing, recovery, and optimal growth and development. That's how I think cultures have evolved to create who we all are now. It was not one little dyadic experience. It was the collective wisdom, and that was brought to the next generation, either directly or indirectly. And there's a lot of indirect human development that happens when we provide the opportunities for children to grow and thrive from the people that are around them.
So that's my little talk with you all. I hope that the meaning of all of this touched your own mindset about all this opportunity, gave you truly a sense of hope of what we can do collectively, remembering countering isolation is a critical element of opportunity in front of us. That's a relational health frame. How do we message that to all the families that we work with, and especially the next generational work that we're called to do with a shift of paradigm. So thank you for the opportunity. Deborah, I'm turning back to you, I think. And I welcome questions, comments, counterpoints, pushback, and I'd be happy to answer any of your thoughts and ideas. Thanks.
Dr. Willis, wow, thank you. That was amazing. I'm so inspired and a little choked up after that last video. So thank you. And I'm going to just, there was some chatter about triple P. I think we've solved some of that. We should name some of these maneuvers about flipping back and forth with sharing screens and handing off during the Zoom era. I don't think I'll stick my landing at all, but I'm going to see if there are people that want to come off mute and just talk and raise some questions. It's such a rich talk for discussion. And see if there's folks that want to, before I launch in, to see if anyone wants to raise anything. I'll look through the chat here. Well, I will just raise one thing just for your comment, and I'm just going to raise just what I see with young parents a lot is technology, and I'm just so interested how that's changed relationships too. I'm grateful for being able to Zoom with you on the other coast, but I often see that, cell phones, I see it's, people interacting with their phone a lot more than their babies sometimes. And I just think that has had a profound change, in some ways very positive, in some ways I feel like we're all running this great experiment, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are about the technology and how that's changed how humans interact, and just some thoughts about that while I flip around here.
I'm sure all of us have an opinion, and we're all nervous about it, because we can ask ourselves some hard questions, like, why are so many of our college youth talking about being lonely and isolated? Why are the suicide rates, forgive me, going up? why are we facing anxiety and depression, which all of us know that you counter those isolated symptoms by talking with somebody and being connected. The whole essence, I'm not a Freud guy, but one of the major discoveries was that when you talk with somebody else about your story, there's a healing process. This has been known forever. So the sense of isolation makes me incredibly nervous. Then, back to pediatrics and early childhood, we all see, unfortunately, what I unaffectionately call toy pollution. And I'll put TVs and now screens in that genre. You and I all know that what we've learned is emotional connection requires eye contact, facial contact, and shared moments and experiences. And that becomes a skill. And if that's not done as a response to the baby's orienting and social responsiveness, the baby solves that problem by not seeking it. So thereby the learning process of being isolated to myself rather than reaching out to others when I'm stressed doesn't develop, in my opinion, as strongly. Hence the regulation of emotions, frustration, disappointment, fear, anxiety are unfortunately not well developed as a self-regulatory capacity because they've not been enough as a co-regulated experience that becomes an independent skill of stress regulation as an outcome. Okay, that's a long-winded scientific thinking, but how do we bring that to families? How do we just make it visible? Many parents, they have the same story. They have not had the emotional connection themselves with others either. And as I would argue, it's kind of a lost cultural generational capacity. And yet, with all due respect, they're all lonely too, in terms of that social connection. There's some really interesting work going on where encouraging mothers and fathers to share the emotional experience, meaning an emotional feeling with babies eye to eye and face to face, has families that have never experienced that open up to new discoveries. We all know that there's a healing force always operating for resiliency at the birth of a baby. And how do we operationalize that? It's not that cell phones are bad, and it's not that screen times are bad. It's just that it's not a replacement for getting first those emotional connection abilities in place. Then you can learn and play and explore, and it's a sort of a non-issue. But it's the sequence of when that makes me nervous. So giving the cell phone or the iPad to a dysregulated baby to keep them not bothering me is going to end up with behavioral and social difficulties down the way, because that dear child does not learn how to regulate themselves, and they will drive their parents nuts over time. We've got to be talking about this out loud. Families will make their own decisions, but they can also discover something really meaningful for themselves. And that co-regulation is a lost art in this culture. And we've used toys and objects as the co-regulator and not ourselves as human individuals. And I think our children, unfortunately, have paid the price. Now, that's an opinion, but it's grounded under some findings that are really shocking, if not compelling. That's what got me into the business of early relational health. That's what actually got me into the business of bringing this into primary care as a mental health promotion strategy, because it's a deep cultural vulnerability that we have. That's an opinion, Deborah.
No, that's it. I'm gonna come back. Dr. Rains put in a comment, the co-regulate, there's great video. Thanks so much for directing our attention to the relational interaction space between child and parent versus seeing only the individual child or parent, and your focus on development of social engagement, which really your response speaks to that. And I'm going to ask Lisa, do you want to come off mute? Because I see you're raising your hand. I don't know where I saw that, but wow, somehow I've advanced my knowledge of Zoom. Lisa, do you want to come off mute? And
Yeah, can you hear me, Deb?
yeah.
Yeah, no, I think, thank you so much, Dr. Willis. I mean, this was like, I'm part of the ASHU phase 2, and a couple of my colleagues are on the call too. And, I commented in the chat that this was really inspiring. And I feel like this is like the Pollyanna vision, and, I hope we can get there. And talk about what Deb had brought up. It just reminded me of an experience that I had just this afternoon with a new family that moved from Kansas, and a 10-month-old and a 30-month-old, and mom is here going to law school, and they have no family, they have no support. Dad is staying home, and we have this 5210, initiative that we started, years ago when I was chapter president of the Maine AAP, when we got a grant from the AAP nationally. And the dad says, with the 2 hours of screen time, what does that mean? And I said, well, under 2, we want no screen time. He's like, so her tablet, she's watching whatever, I don't even know, Blimpie or the pig person or whatever. He said, we're going to have to take that away. And to me, that was just like so moving for me, because we have conversations with families, and they sort of like, do they really hear me, or do they really hear us, and do they really understand? And this family that I have no relationship with whatsoever, I just saw them today as a new family, just moved to Maine. They got it. They said, wow. Like, I wonder, like, has nobody ever said that to them before? But they're like, we're taking that tablet away. And that was like the highlight of my day. So thank you for everything. And, and that was just like, these are the moments that I live for in my practice.
And I would propose to you, families do too, because they're suffering. How many of us have met mothers or fathers where they have to go back to work, and they know that separating from that baby is painful, but they have to? This moment of the cash transfer opportunities. There's some really interesting data recently that's suggesting some families are choosing to stay home because they think it's better for themselves and their family, father and or mother. There's some forces that are really shaking up this separation from babies into poor quality childcare environments, or worse. That's raising that the public knows things are not well right now with their children, and they worry about the future of their kids. You provide them that piece of information, and it's so refreshing to a part of their experience. Remember, the driver of so much of, my opinion, of the separation pressure on young families has been economic. Poverty and having individual women and fathers that have to work for survival has driven the compromise for young babies' needs. I was in a conversation today with people that, there's a big difference from this universal pre-K push, which is wonderful, but it's different than the prenatal to 3 push in terms of the developmental needs of young kids. And I've been, I'm championing the criticalness of focusing relationally and asking yourself the question of policies that disrupt the relational health, not just the cultural elements of parenting practices that are myths, but more importantly, the cultural forces that have generated for us what we're wrestling with now in terms of human well-being. And the opportunity that's happened with Biden-Harris and the dollars coming out, there's a huge opportunity to seize it and learn. We've got a lot to learn here. We've got a lot to do. But when you take a relational frame and strengthening relationships, it's a unique opportunity. Thanks, Lisa, for sharing that story. It's compelling, isn't it?
It is, for sure.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. All right, you all. I am conscientious of the hour and everyone's time tonight. So Dr. Willis, I'm going to say again, thank you for an amazing and inspiring talk.
Thank you.
And just run up, we will post these slides, but we want to make sure people are aware and have access to some of the resources from the AAP, the statements on race and equity, some of our information about family engagement. The family advisors on the ASHU project have really just been amazing and given a lot of information and impacted how people have done their work at the practice level. And then Family First Maine has done an amazing job developing its plan. And so I know several people heard of the work done in that at one of our ASHU talks, but more information on that. And then finally, just recently released that as part of the ASHU work, a curriculum through PediaLink on perinatal depression. So really, really key for that early relational health. And then I'll put in a plug for the rest of our series, you all. We have a lot more to do. And again, talking about relationships and engagement and mental health, our favorite Greg Marley will be back with us talking about resilience and re-engaging youth in light of the pandemic for next week's. And then like us on Facebook, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We really, really, really appreciate it. And thank you for all you're doing. Please be safe. Enjoy the last days of the Maine summer. Actually, I think fall starts tomorrow.